video to take you through an approach and an example for the conflict and tension 16-mark question. You'll notice on the screen that there are three different examples here of 16-mark questions or evaluation questions from the conflict and tension paper. Take a look at how they've been coloured. Each of those colours represents one of the key features that you can expect to see in this question style. Here's a key that shows exactly what we're looking at here. So for every conflict and tension 16-mark question, you'll see there's a named factor, a clear overall question focus. Let's think of this as the kind of bigger picture here, the bigger historical picture, and finally a term that communicates some form of importance. So if we look at our first example at the top left of your screen, we'll see that the named factor is the Nazi-Soviet Pact. The clear overall question focus is the outbreak of the Second World War. And then finally, the term that communicates importance is main reason. And so the aim of this question, as you can see, would be to judge the extent to which the Nazi-Soviet Pact can be seen as the main reason for the outbreak of the Second World War. Now, under each of these, you've got a second statement that says, how far do you agree with this statement? And that alerts us to the fact that this is, in fact, an evaluation question or a debate question. You need to show that you understand that not only, for example, was the Nazi-Soviet Pact one of the main reasons for the outbreak of the Second World War, but there were others as well, and hopefully you'll be happy to explain them. Okay, so when you're faced with one of these questions, what should you do? Well, one approach is to start to pick apart the question and link it to what you already know. So I've taken one of the other samples here as our working model. This one says, Chamberlain, so Neville Chamberlain, British Prime Minister, was the individual who was most responsible for the outbreak of the Second World War. How far do you agree with this statement? So when I see this question, I want to make, in essence, a quick mind map, either literally in my mind or on the question paper. Who was Chamberlain? What do I know about why he mattered during this time period? When it says most responsible, that kind of implies that there were other individuals involved as well. So who else might this question want me to talk about? And then finally, what do I know about the outbreak of the Second World War? Why did it happen? What happened in the lead up to it? If I have a quick think about those ideas just before I start to formulate a plan for my response, chances are the way in which I write my response will be a lot more organised. And so at this stage, once you've seen the question and started to pick it apart, it's a good idea to maybe start to think about what will your overall decision be. Now, for my sample, I've decided that whilst Chamberlain was important, I actually think that Hitler was more important, and perhaps Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union at this time, was less important. So on my exam script, what I might do is make a quick bullet-pointed list. I want to first have an intro, then I want to mention Chamberlain, because he's the first individual who's mentioned in the question, then Hitler, because I see him as most important, and then Stalin. And I'm going to aim to write a conclusion that really does explain why I've put one over the other in terms of who was most responsible. Now, I've thought about what I know about the question, and I also have a general idea of how I'm going to plot it out. My next step is to make sure that I'm structuring my response well, because the structure of your response can have a real impact on the grade and mark that you receive. So on the left-hand side of the screen here, you can see the best structure to follow for this type of question. It needs an introduction, then it needs an explanation of the named factor. So that's the factor, the cause, the consequence, whatever it is that is named in the question. Then it needs the explanation of another factor. It might be the one that you see as being more important than the named factor, or one that's less important. Either way, it's got to come second. And you'll need an explained conclusion at the end. Everything that's in green here or the introduction is absolutely required in your response. You need to at least have a debate between two different factors. If you've got time, by all means have a go at writing a third, but it is possible to get into the top level here, so that's 13 to 16 marks, without writing a third explained factor. Okay, so let's delve deeper into this response. Your introduction should aim to give your overall view on the question and name the other factors that you're going to be explaining. It doesn't need to be too long. A couple of sentences will do it here. And you'll see in the worked example that I'm able to share just how quickly you can do those two processes. Next comes the explanation of the named factor. Now, this must be the one that is named in the question, even if it's not your most important factor. Because the question names it, you must address it first. The next paragraph should focus on either the second most important factor, if you think the named factor is important, or the one that you think overall should be considered most important or most responsible, however the question wants you to think about importance. Your final factor is usually going to be one that's of less importance. It might still matter, but maybe not as much. You should only attempt this if you're confident that you have time to do both this factor and a conclusion. Because ultimately, the conclusion is really important. And it needs to be more than just a statement of your overall view. It needs to be an explanation of that view. And ideally, it will show the thinking, the process that you've been through to reach your judgment. Why, for example, have you placed one factor over another during the course of your response? If you can, it's also a good idea to try and show how there are connections between the factors. Okay, so let's have a look at how the levelling system can be considered different for the different types of responses that we might see as examiners. So here we have level 2, level 3 and level 4 criteria. And the three things that we're really looking for when we mark your work are the use of specific detail, the number of factors explained, and is there a clear line of argument or an opinion on the question. Now it might be worth just pausing the video here so that you can have a read through and try to identify where are there differences and similarities between these levels. Okay, so let's take a look at level 4. Now, level 4, when it comes to the use of specific detail, is very similar to level 3 and level 2. There's no getting away from it. You're going to have to use some specific details in order to explain the role played by each of your factors. Specific details, of course, means names, dates, things that you'd only know if you had a deep and studied understanding of the particular topic. When it comes to how much you need to write, a level 4 response might have 3 explained factors, as well as an introduction and a conclusion, but it can only have 2. And as you'll see for level 3 and for level 2, we're looking to have 2 explained factors, each in their own paragraph. Now, sometimes the difference between a level 2 and a level 3 response is that the level 2 response will explain 2 factors, but maybe they won't be successfully paragraphed. Remember, using paragraphs is a really good way for you to communicate to the reader that you're looking at different factors. And the important thing to remember here is that this is an evaluation question, so it requires a level of argument. The best responses have a clear, defined viewpoint in the introduction. Then, when they introduce each factor, they use language of importance, to try and illustrate where they see that factor fitting into their overall argument. So it might say, for example, in my view, Chamberlain was not the most important or most responsible for the outbreak of the Second World War. The next paragraph on Hitler might say, however, Hitler was of more importance. So just as you're introducing your factors, it's worth attaching some kind of phrase that communicates how important you think they are. Importantly, the conclusion for level 4 will be not only a separate body, but also explained. Similar things are happening at level 3, but it might be that your conclusion is less well developed, or alternatively, you've introduced everything as uniformly an important factor. At level 2, we commonly see a single line decision made, either at the beginning or the end. So try to avoid just the single line decision. Okay, here are some commonly asked questions regarding 16-mark questions for this paper. The first one is, can I get into level 4, which is 13 and above marks, with only 2 factors explained? And the answer is yes, as long as you have an explained conclusion as well. Question number 2, which factor should I write about first if I do not agree that the main factor, the one named in the question, was most important? Well, the answer here is always the same. Always write about the name factor first, then introduce your next one as the most important. Should you attempt a conclusion before coming back to do a third factor? Well, if you feel as though you may not have time to write a third factor in sequence, it's better to take this approach and to do introduction, 2 factors, explain conclusion, and then come back and have a go at a third factor if you've still got some time left. Ideally, you're going to have between 24 and 26 minutes for your response here. Okay, and then finally, what does a linked conclusion mean? Well, a linked conclusion simply means one that explores the relationship between factors in order to decide upon which was more important. Now, if you go across to the hub, where you've probably found this video anyway, you're going to see that there is a fully formed written sample of this particular question, and in that it has a linked conclusion. So as you read it through, consider, how is it showing that these factors, or in this case individuals, were connected to one another? Did the actions of one mean that the other had to take action themselves? Okay, I hope that's been useful. Do take a look at the presentation for this video on the hub, and it's really important to have a read through that practice question as well, just to see what a good 16-mark response looks like. It's got a couple of annotations on it to show you where a claim is being made and the use of the language of importance. So do have a look through, and I hope the response goes well for you.